Good morning. My name is CE Pugh. I'm the CEO of National Co-op Grocers, and it's a delight to be with you this morning. NCG is a purchasing and business services cooperative. We serve 148 individual food co-ops in the country, 38 states. This group operates just over 200 stores, generates annual sales of $2.5 billion, with 1.3 million consumer owners and over 10,000 employees in the system. I'm going to talk with you today about what happened over the past year with COVID, what changed in the system, and what remains. Before we begin, let's take a moment to acknowledge the individuals we've lost to the COVID-19 pandemic. As of this recording, almost 600,000 in the US and 3 million worldwide. I also want to recognize the essential workers on this call and essential workers in our stores and everywhere who've risked their lives to support us. We acknowledge the pandemic, like all crises, disproportionately harms people of color and has further exposed inexcusable disparities in health, economics, and justice, including police brutality, which has taken countless human lives. We recently shared some sense of relief upon the conviction of George Floyd's murderer on all counts. We are thankful for this accountability and hopeful for a time when we realize true justice. Unfortunately, the events since then make it clear how much more work we have before us. The global pandemic disrupted the entire retail food system. What were the most dramatic changes? What remained the same? And what can we expect going forward? As the pandemic took hold early last year, we were not sure what to do. We didn't have a playbook for this. We didn't have a guidebook. Everything looked bleak. We saw sales explode overnight in March during the pantry loading season, and then collapse in April as everyone sheltered at home. I received this message from one of the managers of the co-ops. Gave me great hope. I want to read it to you now. I'm feeling a little more confident. We pivoted fast. We were the first in our community to wrap produce, the first to empty bulk bins and pack it all, the first to install plexiglass for the cashiers, the first to wear masks, and certainly the first and only to be communicating with transparency, solutions, and love. We got curbside service going ugly, but really fast. People were really impressed with their knowledge and care. I think this message is representative of exactly what happened in every food co-op. People didn't know what to do. They just did the work before them. We came to work every day and did the best we could as we sought to keep everyone safe and continue to serve our communities. So let's talk a little bit about what changed. Definitely more meals prepared at home. No question, when all the restaurants closed, people had no choice but to return to their grocery store and shop more, and we saw that. The entire industry had a record sales year, food co-ops included. And you see, we saw this in the system. This is the NCG co-op system sales, the rate of growth. And you see that the system enjoyed just over 4% growth in 2020. The highest since 2015. It was a very challenging year, but the strong sales growth did support improved financial outcomes for NCG food co-ops and other grocers. If you look at the quarterly breakdown, you can see in Q1 the pantry loading season. That's the time when you'll recall when we could find no toilet paper, no paper towels, no tissues, no cleaning supplies, etc. Then we saw the sales collapse in Q2 as everyone sheltered in place, and then begin to pick up again in Q3 and Q4. Overall, ending up at that 4% that we mentioned earlier. The quarter just ended here in 2021. You see we're trending against the pantry loading season last year, and the food co-op system was down 5%. But I can say that in April, sales have picked back up to high single digit, low double digit growth. So going into the rest of 2021, we're seeing strong sales growth continue. Now, if you go a little deeper into the stores and look at the various departments, it's actually a tale of two stores. While the system as a whole was only up 4%, meat was up double digit, produce was up double digit, produce up 10%, meat up 25%, but deli collapsed. And prepared foods in deli makes up a big part of food co-op sales. And when lots of hot bars, lots of self-service salad bars, and all those were shut down overnight. You can see down 40% in Q2, down over 20% in Q3 and Q4. It really had a big impact in pulling down the sales of everyone. And also some inflation has returned. And I'm sure you're seeing this as you shop locally, but beginning mid last year, food at home inflation picked up fairly dramatically, first time in years. And today is running 5, 6, 7% inflation in some categories. And I personally expect that to continue for some time. E-commerce came out of nowhere. Most food co-ops prior to the pandemic had very little to no e-commerce options for customers. But overnight, over 100 co-ops stood up curbside just immediately, did a fantastic job. And 27 of those also had a delivery option. Of those that operating e-commerce, curbside was averaging 4% of sales last year and delivery averaging 2% of sales. You can see how that compares to Kroger. Kroger reported close to 10% of sales in all forms of e-commerce, curbside and delivery. We know that in the past few months, curbside's declined down to 2 to 3% of sales. Delivery also declined. But we do think that demand for e-commerce will continue in the years ahead. Employee safety is paramount. Co-ops move quickly. As we noted in the email I got, moved quickly, first in their communities to implement social distancing, put up the plastic cashier barriers, provide personal protective equipment for all staff, extra cleaning, extra sanitizing, limited store hours. And the focus on employee and customer safety remains today. Shopper metering. Limiting the number of customers in the store at one time to permit better social distancing. Shorter store hours. A lot of people opening later and closing earlier, just to take pressure off staff, frankly. Special shopping hours for seniors or those with compromised immune systems, that continues. Higher staff wages, whether it's a hero bonus or hero pay or just increases, there's no question that higher staff wages have been implemented and are here to stay. Strong staff collaboration, just essential for everyone working together to figure out how to keep each other safe. These were not top-down solutions. As a matter of fact, some local health departments were recommending when people would call asking what to do to call the co-op. They seem to have it figured out best. And that's really just a result of everyone working together to identify how best to proceed, how to stay open, how to serve the community, how to keep everyone safe. Reimagining prepared foods. Most prepared foods were shut down and folks shifted and had more grab and go, some full service offerings, and that continues. Increased focus on food handling and increased focus on value as many people lost jobs and were trying to stretch their food dollars. Value became more important. Within the NCG co-op system, we have a brand, the Field Day brand. It's effectively like our in-house private label. It's called a control brand, value-based, natural and organic. Sales were up 20% last year and continue to grow strongly. It's now the number 2 brand in the co-op system. For those of you curious, Organic Valley is number 1. The Field Day brand is now number 2 in the NCG co-op system. And that growth continues. So what do we think stays the same? What's going to outlast the pandemic? Definitely higher demand for e-commerce. So those of you thinking about new stores and developing new stores, it won't be for everyone. Everyone won't have the real estate, won't have the physical capacity. But if you do, you might consider, how to optimize curbside pickup, how to optimize some staging areas for curbside, et cetera. Demand will continue, we think. The importance of more affordable options, no question, as people as the economy continues to be uneven. Higher staff wages. We all read about the increase in rents, the increase in housing. That's going to continue. We're seeing inflation pick up. That's going to just require higher staff wages going forward. We think more meals prepared at home will continue. Not to the degree of pre-pandemic. The restaurants are going to open. People are going to go back to restaurants. But folks, we think many folks have rediscovered the joy of cooking at home, preparing meals at home, and that grocers will continue to benefit from a little increase in store shopping. Some change to prepared foods. It's unclear where that's going to shake out. Some people are shrinking their prepared foods departments, going to maybe just a full service option or more grab and go. Others are now reopening the hot bars and the salad bars. Yet to be seen where that'll end up. Continued safety awareness, and continued collaboration among staff as folks work together to figure out how best to operate going forward, how best to serve their communities. And the appeal of smaller neighborhood grocers. Just something that might have been unexpected was that the smaller food co-ops, smaller neighborhood food co-ops outperform their larger counterparts in most cases. And I think it's where people perhaps found the appeal of a smaller neighborhood store, maybe felt safer in that smaller store, easy to get in, easy to get out. Greater collaboration with suppliers continues as we work to diversify our supply chain. Food co-ops held up very well in last March and April when many stores were out of meat and produce due to a more diverse supply chain, and work within the food co-ops continues to establish relationships with additional suppliers and work more closely with all their suppliers. And we believe a more competitive marketplace is in our future also, as Amazon continues to expand its reach in grocery, and every more dollars, I suppose, more investors, more companies chasing the grocery dollar. So what now? Well, the co-ops are a better business model. We do operate a better business model, an alternative to capitalism at a time when we desperately need an alternative to capitalism. We add value to our communities. We serve multiple bottom lines. We focus on healthy people and communities, and we're governed locally. We're locally governed by local ownership and local control, all to build stronger communities, working with healthier people to improve the health of people through good food, greater care and service to our community. And we're looking outward. We're looking outward as to the needs in our community. How can we address the needs of our community? We're not looking inward. And we're working to build a more inclusive economy. Greater cooperation is what the world needs now more than ever. And I'm so pleased that you all are working to build new food cooperatives in your community to address the needs of your community. It's not an outside entity coming in to help you. It's not someone else saying, here's a solution. It's you and your community solving the need that you see, solving the problems that you have, working to improve your community locally. So important, maintain your food sovereignty in your community and the wealth associated with that. NCG is delighted to be of service to you. It's my pleasure to talk with you today. Please reach out if we can be of any assistance. Now I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie Hudspeth. Bonnie's with the Neighboring Food Co-op Association in New England. And Bonnie's going to give a little different perspective on what we just experienced the past year and what we can expect going forward. Bye-bye now. Say hello to Bonnie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, CE. As CE mentioned, I'm Bonnie Hudspeth. I'm really excited to build on the foundation that you laid down, CE, and share a couple more snapshots and takeaways from our region. And so before jumping in, I just want to share quickly, the lens that I bring to what I'll be sharing is through the Neighboring Food Co-op Association. And we are a network of 40 food co-ops, 10 of which are startups like you, locally owned collectively by more than 160,000 people across New England and New York. And so through NFCA, we are supporting the shared growth and innovation and ultimately the success of our food co-ops who are working together to build a thriving cooperative economy and a healthy and just and sustainable food system in our region. So I'm really excited to talk more with you about some of the things that we've taken away over the past year plus. So rather than focusing on what did not work too well as responses to the pandemic, I really want to share some of the themes that emerged around how our food co-ops used their collective strength and information sharing and mutual support to respond to the needs that were coming up in their communities. And they were changing needs, right? So the 4 takeaways I hope that will help you all as you organize your co-ops are around mutual aid and collaboration within our communities and among co-ops as well. The importance of trust, transparency, and relationships. You know, CE hit a little on that, but I want to dive deeper. I also want to talk about how important and significant cooperative identity was and is. That more folks come to understand that our co-ops have a core purpose and of serving and building power in their communities and providing space for meeting needs. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. And also by recognizing who's being heavily and unduly impacted, we need to think about as co-ops, how do we better serve and reflect our whole communities and truly carry out our greater purpose? So around mutual aid and collaboration, as things with the COVID-19 pandemic were really cranking up and our communities started to understand no one from outside really knew what to do or was coming in to help, right? There was profound mutual aid networks established. And as CE mentioned, mutual aid and community organizing is really recognizing that we're all in this together, that we have the solutions in our communities. There's no one coming in to save us, right? We all need good food. It means that we're rooted in solidarity, that we're working together, not charity. And that the problems in our communities are collective problems. Therefore, they need collective solutions. This is an all of us situation. So I think this is true for what was needed to respond to the pandemic. And it's also true and a powerful framework for organizing our food co-ops based in mutual aid and solidarity and community organizing frameworks. And that's really core to our co-op's purpose. And to you opening your co-op, that will be more than just a grocery store in your community. I think it also relates to another immense need rising up in our communities. How do we rehumanize each other? Because we experience national leadership reliant on us divided, reliant on us dehumanizing each other to keep our country's capitalist and racist systems going strong, right? So at the same time, many of us are hungry for alternatives. It's probably why you're organizing your co-op, right? We're hungry for alternatives, and our co-op served as a gathering place in our communities for dialogue and mutual aid and space to build connections and rehumanize each other. Another thing that we noticed was that the mutual aid and the community-led problem solving that arose in individual co-ops also spread among co-ops in our region as they learned from each other through peer dialogue. So at Franklin Community Co-op in Massachusetts, they established a neighbor-to-neighbor mutual aid program where community members could request or offer help, and the co-op was the matchmaker in the clearinghouse. That's much more than selling groceries, right? That the needs that came up were around getting rides to doctor, shopping, needing different things. So it's much more than just being a neighborhood grocery store. And at the Portland Food Co-op in Maine, they put together a substitute shopper program as a tool for connecting volunteers who were able and wanting to help out and offer shopping services with those in need of shoppers and in need of groceries being purchased. So the program was open to everyone in their community. And it was one extra innovation the co-op did to make all of their shoppers feel safe and be able to get their food safely. And so as we were connecting and hearing stories like this from co-ops in our region, we saw the importance of peer learning and innovation, both in operations and in governance, in how we serve our communities. So the NFCA brought together our staff around how to shift and adjust departments hit hardest by the pandemic, such as bulk and prepared foods, and also groups working on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. We also put together a COVID listserv for the co-ops in our region so that folks could share how did they respond, how are they transparent and communicate when a staff member got COVID. One co-op was like, do not share about shopping regulations on social media because it will blow up in your face. Instead, have greeting stations, have signage in your stores, right? So they were able to share lessons learned, mistakes made, and things that they were do to better serve their community and pivot. And this collaboration also translated to the board level. And board members are really hungry too to share lessons learned and how they could do their job as governing and overseeing the co-op, and at the same time responding to community need. So these channels for collaboration and learning were crucial. Co-ops were able to learn and innovate and change quickly with a rapid environment. And so from this, a takeaway for you all is this renewed understanding of the importance of group wisdom and collaboration, particularly in times of crisis. And related to that, another thing that stood out was the co-ops who fared well during the pandemic was, the importance of the strength of the relationships, both inside the stores, like among co-op staff, with producers and suppliers, and also with the shoppers in the community. And the resilience of our co-ops depended on the strength of relationships and trust. So a big takeaway is the importance of investing in this, investing time and resources in team building, in platforms for communication, in leadership training for managers and staff. We could have said this before the pandemic, right? But the pandemic shone a light on how important these things really were in the co-ops weathering this crisis. And to give another example of where trust and relationship depth were crucial, came up early last year when CE was mentioning the supply chain issues were blowing up, the grocery shelves were empty. Except there was something noticeably different when I was looking at the photos our co-ops were posting. And, we always talk about how our co-ops are supporting local farmers and why control the food system matters, right? Well, this was a moment that exposed how much it matters. Our co-ops buy substantially more from local farmers and producers, and they're stable and trusted year-round markets. So when we saw or experienced empty grocery shelves, it was scary. And then we noticed how our food co-ops were working with the local farmers and suppliers that they had long-standing relationships with to fill the gaps. They literally picked up the phone and said, hey, we're out of eggs. Do you have more? We're out of milk. And it worked, in the crucial groceries, maybe not toilet paper, but the things we need to eat. And people noticed the difference. And co-ops could also share that fewer hands had touched your food as a way to differentiate, right? Like I remember seeing a photo of my local co-op social media of Howard Prusak, one of the oldest organic farms in our state, from High Meadows Farm. He was delivering squash and potatoes, and the produce manager snapped a photo of him. He was like literally handing her the potatoes that he had taken and brought into the co-op. And it was one of the most reassuring things to see in a time of instability and uncertainty. I know Howard, he's a neighbor, a community member, someone I trust. I know how he grows his food. So more people began looking to local sources for food, and our co-ops were there and ready with longstanding relationships with farmers, right? So the significance of these long established direct relationships with local farmers that our co-ops had been building over years was suddenly made clear and understood by more community members. And the idea of the trust and transparency and relationship depth really came out to play. Another key success indicator that emerged was the importance of courageous and communicative leadership. I've got this. If you ever hear someone say, I've got this, it's a red flag, particularly in a freaking unprecedented global crisis, right? It's tied to the dominant culture norm of individualism and separateness, the focus on single charismatic leaders working in isolation. And we were seeing that from our national leader at the time and from some local leaders too. And it's ultimately harmful to all involved, right? It is not you can't trust one individual to solve community problems and national problems. So really what became clear is that in times of crisis, we need group wisdom. We need community and collectivism. We need everyone. We also need leaders in our co-ops who are vulnerable and transparent, who understand the wisdom and value of other team members and how dangerous it is to isolate in times of crisis, to not reach out to their other co-ops to be like, hey, how'd you handle this? So this incredible leadership looks like synthesizing, working together with common understanding. You know, if I misunderstand an employee, saying, hey, what I heard you saying was this, is that correct? Someone who's investing in huddles. How can we learn from each other? What are you seeing on the floor? How can we bring this back to our departments? How can we make sure that we're all feeling as safe as possible, as supported as possible? If you have a standoff with someone that doesn't want to wear a mask and is getting up in your face, right? The huddles, the group learning, the group communication, the listening to the wisdom was incredibly important. And we need leaders who welcome input up and down the chain of command. And we know we've needed courageous communicative leadership for a long time, right? But the pandemic just made it even more clear how much it's truly needed. And we're still in this pandemic. At some point, we'll be on the other side in some ways, helping our communities rebuild more resiliently in a way that addresses the disparities in our system that the pandemic has further unveiled, right? We can't just fix some of the symptoms. We really need to do root level, systemic addressing of the challenges that have been made very clear. So if we think of our co-ops as just business entities, we're missing so much of the story of our deeper cooperative identity and who we truly are. And all the ways that our co-ops are plugged into our communities and mutual aid efforts, more people came to understand the deeper purpose of our co-ops, right? We're not just grocery stores. So we got to build on this and carry this forward, and double down on our cooperative identity and communicating that, because we are structured and well positioned to help our communities and our country rebuild resiliently because of, building on the same things that CE mentioned, that we put people over profit, that we prioritize the well-being of our staff and employees and our shoppers and our community members over the bottom line in a time of a global pandemic. And we're more than good food. We're a movement. We're a place of social network, and our co-ops serve as community hubs. And so one thing that we really noticed was that throughout the pandemic so far, our co-ops fulfilled both the physical need for food, for information, for gathering space, and they also fulfilled an emotional need and a sense of belonging that we all need, especially in times of isolation. So our co-ops roles as trusted sources for community education centers was important. And our co-ops were able to pivot classes on food, health, sustainability into virtual classes. And many reported back that they're now attended by an even greater number of people than before the pandemic. So that's a new opportunity, right? How do we reach more people? How do we share the good things that we're doing to more people? And also, as large gatherings dwindled or were legally restricted in some of our states, co-ops shifted to create physical space outdoors for people to gather. They made bigger lobbies, they put in windows on the street for ordering, like you'll see here in Greenfield, Massachusetts at Franklin Community Co-op, or they built waiting areas with tents and space heaters. They got innovative in cold New England winter, right? To think about how to create outdoor space and gathering space. And these expanded outdoor spaces to gather are here to stay. That's something I think that's going to stick. So when you're designing your store, if you've got the luxury of having space outside, thinking about how do we create a gathering space and the renewed importance of that. And I would say that overall, the spirit of community and the sense of our co-ops as community hubs really increased through this pandemic, because a number of the things that we've been talking about, right? And another part of cooperative identity that I touched on briefly before is really around supporting farmers and producers and ultimately a sustainable and just food system, right? The idea of the importance of essential workers in our ability to put food on our tables and feed our families really was elevated during the pandemic. And the crisis will continue to hit farmers and local artists and local producers hard. So how can we help them as cooperators? So I mentioned before that, most co-ops purchase that co-ops purchase significantly more. So the average food co-op in NFCA purchased from 250 local suppliers, with local sales comprising nearly 30% of our annual revenue compared to about 2% in supermarkets. So you're looking to 2% to 30%. That's a big difference. And I think, and CE mentioned some impact as well, collectively across the country, over 1 million folks are member owners of NCG co-ops. And in our region, that, over 160,000 people collectively own our co-ops. How can we leverage that in building a sustainable food system and economy? We got to keep doing better at telling our story and communicating our unique social and economic impacts, so more of our community members understand it better, and the importance of where we put, where we're buying our groceries from in terms of supporting a sustainable food system. So finally, the pandemic is disproportionately impacting individuals and communities. This virus has been like an MRI. It's exposed so many injustices in our society. And so there are opportunity areas for our co-ops to reduce the negative impacts of the pandemic. But beyond that, to address these injustices in our system based on race, class, gender, sexual orientation, right? And people in our communities are trying to figure out what they can do, how they can help. So our co-op should be thinking about how we can co-create value. How can we take what our community is hungry for and offer them an opportunity to plug in and address these injustices? What is our role both in our communities and in changing systems on a larger scale if we're working together, right? And using that mentality, this moment is really calling us to recognize who in our communities is being most heavily impacted by the pandemic, who is being the most excluded from wealth building opportunities, from ownership, from safety, from a sense of belonging, and how can we better serve and build power with them throughout the co-op? So over the last year, we've seen our stores shifting to curbside, at-home deliveries, addressing a need that existed before the pandemic, right? And we've been able to broaden those services to keep people shopping at the co-op and build up new customer base. So where else can we broaden? I've heard many conversations about universal design, looking with fresh eyes at how to make our co-ops accessible and inviting to all people in our communities. And also learning, I've seen a number of our food co-ops on our peer healthy food access calls that we do quarterly, thinking about how can we expand our programs in response to the recession so that they reach even deeper and stronger and further. How can we even break down more barriers to folks walking in the doors of our store? Does that mean we need to translate our brochure into 5 languages? Okay, let's do it. City Market, Onion River Co-op in Burlington did that. They worked with the Association of Africans Living in Vermont and translated their brochure and worked on doing more translation on their websites. And they're working on, a number of our co-ops are prioritizing putting on their name tags, making sure they have pronouns on their name tags, making sure they identify if staff speak multiple languages to put that on your name tag. So there is, and there's also a strong desire among our co-ops to improve the recruitment and hiring processes to work toward having staff that are more reflective of the community. That's something that we need to continue working on. And also just remembering that, something that we saw was that you serve the whole community sometimes on a person by person basis. It matters how you show up. It matters how you serve every single person that walks through that door of your store. The way that we receive customers, the way that we help is really important. And so making sure that we're thinking of that as you're hiring your first staff, very exciting moment, right? How are you going to train them to make sure that every community member who walks through the doors of your store feels seen, feels responded to, and feels served well with good customer service? So Our food co-ops have a track record. The good news, our co-ops have had a track record of weathering crises like this before. And the majority of our food co-ops in the neighboring Food Co-op Association Northeast region not only survived, but thrived during the Great Recession of 2008. And 2 of them opened out of unmet needs during the Great Depression. Times of crisis have fueled co-ops opening to unmet community need. And that leaves us with a choice now, though, for all of you and for our cooperative movement, is how do we come through the portal of the pandemic? Near the beginning of the pandemic, author and activist Arundhati Roy wrote, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks, and our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through it lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So as cooperators, as co-op builders, we can come through this pandemic portal, inflicting more damage and perpetuating the same injustices, making the same mistakes, or we can learn from our mistakes, deepen our commitment to putting our collective innovations around building the strengths of our unique cooperative identity, expanding our co-op's role in mutual aid, building stronger relationships, and trust and transparency at all levels of relationship, and serving and reflecting our whole community. We can put these things in place and imagine another world and then work to build it together. So let's do it. Thank you all. Thanks to the up and coming team for creating this space and these conversations, and we look forward to seeing you. Please feel free to reach out to us. Thanks.